My name is Serafina Hayes. I am 34 years old, and I live in a house nestled amongst the tall firs and misty hills of a quiet suburb just outside Portland, Oregon. To an outsider, my life might look like a page from a lifestyle magazine, a lovingly restored craftsman bungalow with a garden that bursts with rhododendrons in the spring, a husband whose charm could disarm a king, and the role of a dedicated homemaker. A path I chose with pride more than a decade ago. My husband, Marcus Thorne, is 38. He's a senior investment consultant for a prestigious firm downtown, a man who wears his ambition as elegantly as his tailored suits. He is tall, with dark hair that he keeps perfectly styled and a smile that seems to hold a private, confident light. When we first married, I believed I had found the rarest of things, a partner whose dreams were as big as his heart. Our friends would often say, with a playful nudge, "Serafina, you found a unicorn. Don't ever let him go." I would just smile then, cocooned in the certainty that our love was an unbreachable fortress. We had met in college, me an art history major, him studying finance, and married 2 years after graduation. I had carried within me a quiet, hopeful vision of a home filled with the sound of children's laughter echoing through the sunlit rooms. But life, in its infinite and often cruel wisdom, had other plans. For years of a grueling journey through fertility treatments, of sterile clinic waiting rooms, of hushed, sympathetic voices on the phone, of hope rising and crashing like a relentless tide, left that vision washed away. The final doctor, a kind woman with weary eyes, had gently told me, sometimes, we'd just have to let nature have the final word. In the beginning, Marcus was my rock. He'd hold my hand, his grip firm and reassuring, and whisper, "As long as I have you, Serafina, I have everything." But I remember, with a clarity that still aches, the quiet moments I'd catch him staring out the window at the neighbors' kids playing tag on their lawn. His gaze held a profound, unspoken longing, a silent grief that he never shared with me. Each of those glances felt like a tiny hairline fracture forming in the foundation of our life together. Everything shifted irrevocably when my parents passed away. My father, a history professor with a passion for woodworking, succumbed to a sudden heart attack. My mother, a painter whose canvases were as vibrant as her spirit, followed him 6 months later, her long battle with cancer finally ending. Their loss hollowed me out, but it also made me the sole inheritor of their life's quiet, diligent work, a significant investment portfolio, and their beloved, weathered cottage on the Oregon coast, a place of salty air and cherished memories. The inheritance was more than enough to change our lives. We moved from our modest starter home to the beautiful Craftsman. We bought a new, sleek sedan. We took lavish vacations to Hawaii and the Caribbean. I began to notice a change in Marcus's gaze. It wasn't directed at me anymore, but at the things my inheritance had bought us. It was then that a seed of disquiet, small and nameless, was planted in my heart. To the world, we were still the golden couple. The glossy photos from our trips, the sophisticated dinner parties we hosted, the chorus of congratulations on social media, it was all a beautifully woven tapestry, hiding the frayed threads of my lonely nights. I would lie awake, listening to the gentle hiss of the rain against the window panes, and wonder if this material comfort was slowly eroding the very soul of our marriage. I dismissed the thought as a symptom of my own grief, my oversensitivity. Marcus was still the perfect husband in public, his words still honeyed and affectionate in front of our friends. But I couldn't ignore the growing space between us when we were alone, the way his smile no longer reached his eyes, the subtle chill in his touch. In this house, filled with beautiful things, I was beginning to feel like a ghost in my own life. I never imagined that the legacy I received as a final gift of love from my parents would become the very thing that dragged me into a dangerous, unseen current. In the months that followed our move, the subtle changes in Marcus sharpened into a pattern I could no longer ignore. The man who once rushed home to share the details of his day now seemed to find any excuse to stay away. Our cozy dinners, once the anchor of our evenings, were replaced by terse, impersonal texts tied up with clients. Eat without me. In the beginning, I clung to the belief that he was under immense pressure at work, that a big promotion was on the line. But the excuse became a mantra, and with each repetition, it rang more hollow, tightening a knot of anxiety deep in my belly. He came home late nearly every night. Often, the grandfather clock in the hall would be chiming 10 before his key turned in the lock. He'd enter looking weary, yet his eyes would hold a strange, restless energy, a flicker of excitement that felt disconnected from his claims of exhaustion. When I would gently ask, "Is everything at the office okay, honey?" he'd offer a faint, dismissive smile. "Just a lot of moving parts on a new venture. Don't you worry your pretty head about it." The patronizing tone, meant to sound like care, only deepened my unease. The most troubling change was his phone. It had become a fifth limb, an extension of his body he never let out of his sight. It was no longer left charging on the kitchen counter or resting on the nightstand between us. It lived in his pocket, and when it buzzed, he would swiftly excuse himself, stepping out onto the covered porch or into the garage, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. He used to put all his calls on speaker, sharing office gossip or mundane scheduling with me as if I were a part of that world. Now, his conversations were shrouded in secrecy. One evening, I stepped onto the porch to ask if he wanted tea, and he snapped his phone shut, spinning around with a contrived look of calm. "Client," he said, a little too quickly. "Big deal closing tomorrow." But I had heard it, the soft, lilting laughter of a woman on the other end. It wasn't the brusque, professional tone of any client he'd ever described. He also stopped sharing the monthly credit card statements, a ritual we'd had for years as we planned our budget together. When I brought it up, asking for the latest one, he waved a hand dismissively. "I've got it handled. It's mixed in with my corporate card expenses now. It's just a mess to sort out." A flash of irritation crossed his face, so brief I might have missed it if I wasn't watching so closely. It was the first time he'd ever shown annoyance at my involvement in our finances, a realm we had always agreed would be completely transparent. I began to feel like an intruder in the life I had so carefully built. The long evenings stretched before me, vast and empty. I'd sit in the living room, the beautiful lamps casting a warm glow on an empty armchair, and watch the headlights of passing cars sweep across the walls, wondering with a growing ache, is this the same man who promised to be my partner in all things? I fought a constant battle with myself, my loyalty and love warring against a tide of damning evidence. Trust him, I'd plead with my own heart. Give him space. But night after lonely night, the doubt grew, a creeping fog that I could no longer see through. One Saturday evening, in a surprising turn, Marcus announced he was taking me to a company gala at a lavish hotel downtown. He hadn't invited me to a work function in over a year. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, and the air hummed with polite conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. Marcus was in his element, a magnetic force, laughing and shaking hands. I tried to immerse myself in the facade, to believe that my suspicions were just shadows. But as I stood alone by the towering floral arrangement, nursing a glass of sparkling water, I overheard him speaking with a senior partner. Marcus leaned in, his voice low and confidential. "The Bend project is nearly finalized. Once that's done, I'll have a lot more liquidity and freedom." The partner clapped him on the shoulder, a knowing smirk on his face. "You're playing a long game, Marcus. Just make sure you've covered your tracks." Marcus took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't decipher. Was it ambition? Or was it malice? "Don't worry," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Everything is under control." Bend? The city was a 4-hour drive from Portland, a high-desert hub for outdoor enthusiasts. He had never mentioned any venture there, not once. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I felt rooted to the spot, the cheerful music of the string quartet suddenly sounding discordant and shrill. On the drive home, Marcus placed his hand over mine on the console. It was the familiar, gentle gesture of the husband everyone admired, but all I could feel was the icy coldness of a stranger. And I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that the fog of doubt had finally cleared, revealing a truth I might not be strong enough to face. I thought I had braced myself for the worst, that I had built a wall of cautious composure around my heart. But a single phone call from my best friend, Chloe, shattered that wall and stoked the embers of my suspicion into a raging fire. Chloe and I had been inseparable since our first art history class in college, and she now worked as a fiercely intelligent investigative journalist in Seattle. That afternoon, as I was pruning the climbing roses by my porch, my phone buzzed. Her voice, usually so bright and confident, was hesitant. "Serafina? I have to tell you something, and I really hope I'm wrong." I stilled, the thorns of a rose stem pressing into my fingers. "Chloe, what is it? You sound serious." "I was in Bend last week for a conference," she began, her words careful. "I swear, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I saw Marcus. He was at a little brew pub downtown, sitting on the patio with a blonde woman. She was younger than us. They looked comfortable, Serafina. Really comfortable." Laughing, her hand on his arm. "I don't want to make you panic, but it felt like more than a business meeting." My throat went dry. My heart wasn't just beating, it was slamming against my ribs, a desperate prisoner. "I managed a week, thank you for telling me," forcing a calmness into my voice that I did not feel. After we hung up, I sank onto the porch steps, the world tilting slightly on its axis. So many questions flooded the void. Who was she? Why was he lying? Why did every single piece of this puzzle I was assembling point to a picture of betrayal I couldn't bear to look at? 3 days later, Marcus came home early, a rare occurrence that immediately put me on high alert. He walked in with an uncharacteristically bright smile, his arms laden with groceries. Before I could even ask, he announced, "I've been thinking. We've been so stressed, so distant. I think we need to get away. Just us. I booked a cabin for us in the San Juan Islands for this weekend. It's right on the water. We can hike, read, just be together again. Reconnect. What do you say?" I was stunned into silence. For more than a year, he had used work as a shield against this very kind of intimacy. This sudden, grand gesture felt both like a prayer answered and a meticulously laid trap. I tried to arrange my features into a mask of pleased surprise. "You really did that?" He pulled me into a hug, burying his face in my hair. His voice was a warm, persuasive murmur against my ear. "I love you. That's the only thing you need to remember, Serafina." He pulled back to look at me, his gaze intense, searching. But behind the performance of deep affection, I saw something else, something cold and calculating. That night, sleep was an impossibility. I lay perfectly still, listening to the rhythm of Marcus's steady breathing beside me, the sound a painful counterpoint to the frantic chaos in my own mind. When I was sure he was soundly asleep, I slipped out of bed. An impulse I couldn't control drew me to his leather briefcase, which he'd left by the desk in our study. My hands trembled as I undid the polished brass clasps. I wasn't a spy, I was a wife drowning, and I needed to know if I was imagining the water rising around me. Beneath his laptop and a stack of financial reports, I found a thick, manila folder with a crisp, professional label. My blood ran cold as I read the words, Cedar Ridge Wellness Institute, patient intake file. With a heart that felt like it might stop altogether, I opened it. The first few pages were a blur of clinical jargon and diagnostic codes. But then, my eyes landed on a section with my name printed in bold letters, Serafina Hayes. I read the preliminary assessment, my vision swimming. Patient presents with symptoms consistent with paranoid delusional disorder, potentially accompanied by narcissistic fantasies stemming from unresolved grief and perceived inadequacies. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. I couldn't read anymore. My fingers, numb and clumsy, folded the file and slid it back into its exact place. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold wall, and the tears I had held back for so long finally came, silent and hot, streaming down my face. A highlight reel of the past year flashed through my mind. Marcus's distant gazes, the secretive calls, the financial curtain he'd drawn, and his words from just hours before. That's the only thing you need to remember. I love you. It wasn't a reassurance. It was an instruction. It was part of the script. The trip to the San Juan Islands. It wasn't a getaway to heal our marriage. It was the final act of a play I never knew I was in. And I was beginning to understand, with chilling certainty, that it was a tragedy. The journey north began under a soft, gray Oregon sky, the kind that usually felt cozy and introspective. But the atmosphere inside our car was thick with a tension, so heavy I could barely breathe. Marcus drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Yet, his eyes flickered to the rearview mirror with a frequency that was far from normal. Is everything okay? I finally asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Are you worried someone is following us? He let out a short, strained laugh, a sound devoid of any real humor. No, of course not. Just tired, I guess. A little on edge about leaving work behind. He didn't look at me as he said it, and the lie hung in the air between us. Throughout the drive towards the Washington border, he took 2 calls, his voice a low, urgent murmur, turning his body away from me as if to physically shield the conversation. We reached the small, seaside town of Anacortes, the gateway to the San Juan Islands, late in the afternoon. A persistent drizzle had begun to fall. The ferry doesn't leave for another hour, Marcus said, pulling into the parking lot of the terminal. Let's grab a coffee at that little cafe over there. The cafe, the Salty Gull, was a rustic place with weathered wooden tables and the comforting smell of coffee and baked goods. While Marcus went to find us a table, I stood in line. The young man behind the counter had kind, observant eyes and a name tag that read Finn. As he handed me my change, his gaze lingered on me for a fraction of a second too long. Enjoy the islands, he said, but his tone was flat, almost cautionary. I joined Marcus at a small table by the window overlooking the ferry lanes. He was scrolling intently through his phone. A few minutes later, Finn appeared at our table with a rag, pretending to wipe down an already clean surface. He leaned in, his voice a near whisper meant only for me. I'm sorry to bother you, he said, his eyes darting towards Marcus, who was still absorbed in his screen. But you need to be careful. I saw your husband here a few weeks ago. My heart seized. I kept my expression neutral, looking out at the rain-streaked window. What are you talking about? He was with another woman, Finn continued, his voice low and rushed. A blonde. They were waiting for the same ferry. I overheard them talking. It wasn't right. He straightened up as Marcus looked up from his phone, annoyed by the interruption. Finn gave a quick nod and walked away. Marcus frowned. What was that about? He was just asking if the coffee was okay. I improvised, my mind reeling. A few minutes later, Marcus's phone rang again. I have to take this, he said, standing up. It's the final confirmation on the cabin. I'll be right back. He walked outside, pacing under the narrow awning. I watched him go, my hands trembling around my warm mug. My gaze fell upon the receipt Finn had given me. I turned it over. Scrawled in blue pen were a few hasty words. He's lying. Don't get on the ferry. He talked about an institution, not a cabin. I can help. The world went silent. All I could hear was the frantic thrumming of my own blood in my ears. The medical file. The trip. The overheard conversation about an institution. It all clicked into place with the horrifying finality of a cell door slamming shut. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and walked back towards the counter. Finn saw me coming, his expression full of concern. I abandoned all pretense. What did you hear? I whispered, my voice shaking. He glanced nervously towards the window where Marcus was still on the phone, his back to us. He was talking to the woman. She asked him what would happen to her. And he said, after this weekend, she'll be where she can't cause any more trouble and everything will finally be ours. Then this morning, he came in here alone for a coffee before you arrived. He was on the phone again. He said, the intake paperwork is all filed. She won't be able to contest it. Ma'am, I don't know what's going on, but it's not a vacation. Marcus ended his call and turned, his eyes scanning the cafe for me. His expression tightened when he saw me at the counter. Serafina? What are you doing? It's time to go. They're starting to board. Finn's eyes pleaded with mine. You have to decide. Now. There's a back door through the kitchen. My truck is out back. I can take you to the police station. I took one last look at Marcus, walking towards me with a smile that was all teeth, a predator's smile. The years of love, the memories, the life we had built, it all dissolved into smoke. In that single, terrifying moment, I chose myself. Help me, I mouthed to Finn. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. This way. Quickly. I followed him through the swinging kitchen doors just as Marcus's voice called my name, sharper now, laced with irritation. We ran out the back door into the cold, damp air. Finn's old, beat-up blue pickup was parked by the dumpsters. He threw open the passenger door. Get in. Don't look back. I scrambled inside, my breath catching in a sob. As the truck's engine roared to life, and we peeled out of the alley, I chanced one glance in the side mirror. Marcus was standing in the parking lot, his handsome face contorted into a mask of pure fury and panic. It was not the face of a husband worried for his wife. It was the face of a man whose meticulous, cruel plan had just imploded. The old pickup rattled down the highway, putting miles of rain-slicked pavement between me and the ferry terminal. I sat huddled in the passenger seat, trembling, watching the lush green landscape of Fidalgo Island blur past the window. Finn glanced over at me, his young face etched with concern. The sheriff's office is just a few miles ahead, he said, his voice steady and grounding. You're safe now. I promise. I could only manage a shaky nod, tears I hadn't realized I was crying now streaming down my cheeks. At the small, unassuming sheriff's office, a kind-faced deputy named Eva listened to my story. I told her everything, the secretive behavior, the medical file, the overheard conversations, the escape. She listened with quiet intensity, her expression hardening with each detail. Based on suspicion alone, we can't arrest him just yet, she explained gently. But we are filing an official report. My strongest advice is to get a temporary restraining order immediately and hire a private investigator. You need concrete proof. Finn, who had waited patiently, insisted on driving me to his mother's house in a nearby town, refusing to let me go to a hotel alone. His mother, a warm, soft-spoken woman named Isla, welcomed me into her small, cozy home with a hug that felt like the first genuine human kindness I had received in years. That night, wrapped in a handmade quilt on her sofa, I called Chloe and told her the entire, sordid story. Without a moment's hesitation, she said, I know a man. He's the best. A private investigator based in Seattle. His name is Grant Morrison. I'm calling him for you right now. The next day, I met Grant Morrison in a quiet corner of a library in Bellingham. He was an older man, with shrewd, intelligent eyes and a calm, reassuring demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I'll start by digging into Marcus Thorne's life before he met you, he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. My gut tells me Marcus Thorne might just be a character he's playing. 3 days later, the call came. Serafina. Grant's voice was grim. I need to see you. I have the truth. We met in his sparse, functional office in Seattle. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid a thick file on the desk between us. On top was a photograph. It showed Marcus, or the man I knew as Marcus, grinning, his arm around the same blonde woman from Chloe's description. Standing in front of them were 2 young boys, twins, no older than 9, beaming in front of a neat suburban house in Boise, Idaho. "His real name is Nathaniel Thorne," Grant said, tapping the photo. "That woman is Eleanor Thorne, his legal wife of 12 years. Those are his sons." I stared at the photograph, my mind refusing to process the information. 12 years. He had another family, another life, that entire time. He had married me while already a husband and a father. Grant continued, his voice heavy with the weight of his findings. "They've been planning this for years, ever since you received your inheritance." I got a warrant for his phone records. It's all there. Dozens of calls to a psychiatrist in Portland, a Dr. Alastair Reed. "We have recordings of them discussing the fabrication of your medical file, planning how to have you committed so Nathaniel could gain full control of your assets as your legal guardian." He pushed a stack of bank statements across the desk. There they were, multiple wire transfers to Dr. Reed, with memo lines that read, "consultation fee," and "file preparation." My hands trembled as I picked up the papers. The cold, hard evidence of a plot so monstrous it seemed torn from a film noir script. The man I had loved, the man I had grieved with, the man I had built a life with, was a complete fabrication, a predator who had used my love and my vulnerability as tools for his own gain. Grant placed a hand gently on the file, his gaze firm and resolute. "The next person you need to call is an excellent attorney. I have a recommendation. We have more than enough to not only protect you, but to make sure he and his accomplices face justice." I took a deep, shuddering breath. The pain was immense, a vast, hollow cavern in my chest. But alongside the pain, something new was taking root, a cold, clear, unwavering resolve. My past may have been a lie, but I would not let him be the author of my future. After the staggering revelations in Grant Morrison's office, a strange clarity settled over me. The grief was still there, a heavy cloak, but it was now threaded with the steely fiber of determination. On Chloe's urgent recommendation, I made an appointment with Isabel Monroe, a formidable attorney in Seattle known for her tenacity in cases of complex marital fraud. Her office, with its panoramic view of Elliott Bay, felt like a command center. Isabel, a sharp, elegant woman with an air of unshakable confidence, listened to my entire story without interruption, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Serafina, what you have here is not just grounds for divorce. This is a criminal conspiracy. The first thing we do today is file for an ex parte order to freeze every single asset. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate. We cut off his access to your money immediately." With Isabel and Grant guiding me, I moved swiftly. Within 48 hours, a judge had granted the emergency order, freezing the wealth that Marcus, or Nathaniel, had been so methodically plotting to steal. Simultaneously, Isabel filed criminal complaints with the authorities in both Washington and Idaho, presenting them with the mountain of evidence Grant had compiled. The storm broke with a fury Nathaniel Thorne could never have anticipated. For days later, acting on a multi-state warrant, police arrested him at a motel just outside of Boise, where he had fled after discovering the accounts were frozen. His wife, Eleanor Thorne, was also taken into custody, charged as a co-conspirator. The complicit psychiatrist, Dr. Reed, had his license suspended pending a full investigation. I will never forget the first day I walked into the King County Courthouse. My legs felt weak, but I held my head high. I saw him being led in, wearing an orange jumpsuit, the polished charm and confident smile gone, replaced by a bitter, hollowed-out look. His eyes met mine across the courtroom, and in them I saw no remorse, only the venomous rage of a thwarted predator. The case became a local media sensation. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, their cameras flashing every time I arrived with Isabel at my side. But the fear was gone. My only focus was seeing this through to the end, to close this dark chapter of my life for good. The trial lasted for 2 months. The evidence was irrefutable. Grant Morrison's meticulous investigation, the damning phone recordings, the fraudulent medical file, the financial records, and the marriage certificate from Ada County, Idaho. Nathaniel's defense crumbled under the weight of his own lies. The verdict came on a crisp autumn afternoon. On the charge of bigamy, the court finds the defendant, Nathaniel Thorne, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, the court finds the defendant guilty. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in prison. Eleanor received a 4-year sentence for her role as an accomplice. As they led him away, he didn't look at me. The performance was finally over. I sold the beautiful Craftsman house, a place whose memory was now tainted by deceit. With the assets I had protected and the proceeds from the sale, I made a decision. I moved to the coast, to the weathered cottage my parents had left me, the one place that held nothing but true, untarnished love. It was a modest home, smelling of salt and old books, but for the first time in over a decade, it felt like my own. In the mornings, I would sit on the wide, covered porch, a mug of hot tea warming my hands, and watch the Pacific Ocean roll onto the shore. The endless expanse of gray-green water, the rhythmic crash of the waves, the cry of the gulls, it all felt like a promise. From this day forward, I would build a life on truth, on my own terms, without fear. In the quiet, windswept town on the Oregon coast, I began the slow, deliberate work of healing. Time was measured not by a clock, but by the turning of the tides. My days were simple. I took long walks on the damp, packed sand, letting the salty mist settle on my face. I reread my mother's favorite books and found solace in the familiar weight of them in my hands. I reclaimed my parents' home, not as a place of loss, but as a sanctuary of legacy and love. One afternoon, while exploring the small town's main street, I saw a notice tacked to the community bulletin board outside the local library, Open Studio Workshop, Find Your Voice Through Art. All are welcome. I stood there for a long time, the paper fluttering in the sea breeze. That night, I couldn't sleep, not from anxiety, but from a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, a quiet stirring of purpose. The next Saturday, I walked into the brightly lit studio. And, for the first time since college, I picked up a paintbrush. I painted the ocean, not as a placid, pretty picture, but as I felt it, tumultuous, powerful, and vast. I poured all the grief, the betrayal, and the nascent hope onto the canvas. The more I painted, the more the heavy weight in my chest seemed to loosen. The other people in the workshop, an eclectic mix of locals, became a silent circle of support. We didn't need to share our stories. We shared our art, and in doing so, we understood each other. I kept in touch with Finn, the young man from the Ferry Cafe. He had started his engineering program at the University of Washington, and his texts were always full of cheerful updates about his classes and projects. There was a simple, unguarded sincerity in his messages that was like a balm to my soul. One crisp autumn afternoon, a text from him lit up my phone. "Serafina, I'm coming down to the coast for the weekend to see my mom. She still talks about how brave you were. She'd love it if you would join us for dinner on Saturday, if you feel up to it." I read the message and smiled, a real, unforced smile. The truth was, I was the one who was grateful. That Saturday, I drove to Isla's small, warm house. Dinner was simple, a hearty clam chowder she had made herself, but the conversation was rich and easy. We talked about Finn's dreams of designing clean energy systems, about Isla's garden, and about my newfound passion for painting. I sat there, in that humble, love-filled kitchen, and felt a sense of belonging that had been absent from my life for so long. Here, with these two people to whom I had no ties of blood or history, I felt what I had always craved, the uncomplicated warmth of genuine connection. As I was leaving, Isla took both my hands in hers, her eyes shining. "Serafina," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for trusting my son. You showed him that one person's courage can make all the difference." I squeezed her hands gently, my own heart full. It was Finn who saved me, I said softly. And in doing so, you both taught me that true family isn't always the one you are born into. It's the one you find, the one that finds you, with an open and honest heart. Driving home along the dark, winding coastal highway, I rolled down the window, letting the cool, salty air fill the car. The sky was a vast blanket of stars, clear and brilliant. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my life had finally begun its true second act. It would be a life of my own making, built not on gilded illusions, but on the solid, beautiful ground of self-respect, creativity, and gratitude for the kind souls who had lit the way out of the darkness. My past did not define me, it had, instead, freed me. And for the first time, I felt ready to paint a future that was entirely my own.